Hi, Easy Guy here. Today I'll be doing a quick discussion of Infighter skills and a potential build that you can run. So first things first, this is OBT, so there's a lot of information that's not going to be 100% grounded in evidence. So uh, that's why I call it a discussion and not necessarily a guide, because the information that I have may be completely different from someone else's, and I just want to make it clear that there is no one particular build or one particular set of skills that you can use that will be 100% better in every single situation than another set. Just keep in mind that this is still a very fresh game, and you'll need to experiment a lot and see what works for you more than what just looking for some cookie cutter build. So I want to go over every single skill and what I think about them. So I'll try to do it as quick as possible. So I'll be referring to these skills by the number in the order of the skill, or by their icons if it's something that's recognizable. Because infighters have a advantage of being able to look at their skills depending on their colors. So a couple things that you should keep in mind as we go through the skill is the fact that Infighter's identity makes it so that you have to pick a certain number of yellow skills and a certain number of green skills. And having a good mix of skills that can generate resources and spend resources is also important as well. So those are kind of the hidden elements about Infighter that make it a little bit harder to discuss on a pen and paper basis, because there is a lot of gameplay stylistic choices and stylistic decisions that will affect how your build flows. So starting off, the first skill is probably one of the most important skills an Infighter can use. That's because it's on a 5-second cooldown and it generates 20 green energy, and it's also a gap closer, and it also does pretty decent amount of damage if you spec into it. So I've been running a version of this skill where I put 10 points into it with a right, middle, right, and this works very well because it attacks very fast, and it also has a very low cooldown. So not only do you get out of the animation faster, but you also do a lot of damage with it because it's such a high frequency skill. However, normally you can just go with 4 points and take the right tripod, because that allows you to get 15% increased attack damage for 4 seconds on a 5-second cooldown, which does increase our damage by quite a lot if you play around that buff specifically. The second skill is not as commonly used, but it's very good if you wanna build that focuses on extremely high green energy generation. So if you're running a skill like something like Death Sentence and you need high amounts of green energy generation early on, having 7 points into this is actually quite decent because it generates 30 green energy every 8 seconds, which is very comparable to the first skill. You can also test with 10 points if you want. Almost every single yellow skill does decent damage with 10 points. It's just generally you prefer to put 10 points into green skills as they do more damage. But definitely give these skills a shot on your own and see if you guys like it. The third skill is pretty much a bread and butter. It's very, very good for just resource generation. It's also very quick. It has very low motion value, very, very fast, and it it just works well as a filler skill. You can put in some points into this. So if you put in, let's say, 7 points, don't worry about your tripods. You can pick this left tripod on the middle tree and it will move you forward. So I've heard about Koreans who've been using this specific tripod setup, not the top one, well, the specific tripod on the second tier, to be able to transition or quickly move between attacks so that they can position better in raids. So that's something to keep in mind. But generally, no points into this works very well. The fourth skill is one of the most useful skills that an Infighter has. It's just straight up really good movement speed, or movement skill. So you can it's very far distance. You don't even have to spec points into it in order to start using it. But you can put 4 points, 7 points, and 10 points. It doesn't matter. It'll just do increasingly large amounts of damage. Nodes, top one, you generally want to just take the third one on the right side, because it's going to do a lot of damage. And Infighters just generally don't really care about how much yellow energy we have. We just need to cycle through the green energy a little bit better. So taking this one is just straight up 30% more damage, and fire or just super armor, and then the last tier is just stylistic choice. This right one looks really cool. So if I like, it just looks really freaking awesome. So it's up to you if you want to use this at level 10. But generally, I run this skill on almost every single PvE build. And going forward is a little bit iffy. Going forward because the first one, third one, and the fourth one are pretty much skills that I almost always put into my builds because they're just very useful. Now, is that the right answer? Is that the best way to build an Infighter? Not necessarily, but it's just what I've been using, and it's worked pretty well. So give it a shot, and if you guys don't like it, you can start looking at some of the other choices. So this fifth skill is generally used as a PvP skill. It stuns for 2 seconds, and it's on, or 3 seconds. It's on a 20-second cooldown. However, the base damage is actually quite high. So if you put 7 points into this, and spec for, let's say, larger AoE and 200% increased damage, this skill does a lot more damage than what you'd expect. So compared to like 120, 130 from my Q, this skill will do a solid amount that's really quick, has low animation values, and you can get off very quickly. So it's really easy to fit into rotations. And if you don't need that extra focus generation, or not focus, green energy generation from something like the third skill, then it might be worth putting 7 points into this and going for the extra small bits of damage that you can put in. The next skill is just a foot stomp. It's really solid for leveling, like because it's such a large AoE. It's really solid for PvP, but I won't be discussing PvP specific things. It just does a lot of damage, and it can hit twice as well, with 10 points into it. So this is really good for leveling up and doing dungeons. Now, is it the best skill for raids? Not really, because there are other skills that will do more damage and generate more green energy over time. So this isn't something that I run regularly in raids, but if I could spec freely, I would definitely fit this into a dungeon build or something. That's just really solid skill. The next skill is a little bit so all the skills going forward from here are skills that you always want to put at least 10 points into, because their main focus is damage, or they're not typically used for their utilities. So this skill, you can actually spec into something like the middle tree because it stacks bleed, and then something like right tree or left tree. Actually, the middle tree. All three of these, it's not that important. And the left tree, I believe. Yes, the left tree. And this one will do a pretty decent amount of damage as well. So let me just put it on my skill bar. So there's a lot of numbers, a ton of numbers, and you know this is a dummy, so it's gonna have no defense. So the number that you see right now is gonna be much higher than what you've seen on regular monsters, but it just hits a lot, and it also stacks a bleed, and bleed effects are very strong in this game. Any sort of shock, bleed, or persistent effects that deal damage are deceptively strong, so it's definitely worth giving it a shot. However, I don't really like it personally because it fixes you in place for a little bit too long than what I would normally like. It's really hard to get that off in a raid environment where you have to reposition constantly. So if you can use this well, then it's definitely worth a shot. Now, this skill has a cooldown of 16 seconds. So if you were to replace the skill with another one that you would normally put into, so let's say you use the first 3 skills, or the first one, third one, fourth one, and then you fit this one in, then because this is on a 16-second cooldown and it only generates 20 resource, green energy, you're now looking at a build that can't support high resource spending green skills, because there's just no way to fuel that. And it's really hard to describe without showing you guys like an actual guardian run or a dungeon run of that build in action. But if you just try it out in the in this training room area, you'll see, like, once you cycle through your skills, you're gonna have situations where you just can't use any green skills, although they can be used, like they're off cooldown. So make sure you guys are balancing out your generation with what kind of skills you're using. Okay, so next skill that we'll look at is pushing forward. This is actually a very interesting skill to look at because it's probably one of the highest damaging skills that an Infighter has on a skill per skill basis, meaning a single use of this skill will do a lot more damage than what you would expect. However, it costs about 6 seconds to use. So if I hold it down, you can hold this down for 6 seconds with the right tripod setup. So for that entire duration, you can't do anything else but pushing forward, literally. Now, the reason why it's a good skill is because it does a lot of damage and it scales really, really well with attack speed. If you ever run with a Battle Master or a Bard and you give this skill a try and you use it when they use their attack speed buffs, you're gonna feel like an absolute god. It just feels really good because the attack speed count increases by an absurd amount. Like you're gonna destroy that monster's weakening bar or the disable bar. But the reality is, it's just this skill is very hard to use, especially because for smaller monsters you would have to move your mouse back and forth like that. So instead of pushing forward, like going one direction, most cases you're gonna have to move back and forth. In Guardian Rays, there's gonna be very little situations where you're gonna be able to sit on the boss's butt for 6+ seconds. So it's a really tough skill to fit into your rotation. Also, it's on the cooldown of 24 seconds that lasts for 6 seconds. So effectively, it's a skill that you use every 30 seconds. It only generates 20 green energy, meaning you're not gonna be using this to generate green energy. This kills your energy generation, so you're gonna have to run with a slightly different loadout for your green skills than what you would normally use, because normally you'd use death sentence, right? Which is one of the strongest skills that we have, but you won't be able to use that on a consistent basis. So if you can't use that on cooldown with 100% energy, then what's the point of using it, right? So this skill makes it really hard. Pushing forward makes it really hard to fit it into our build and to work around it. So that's why it's a little bit of an iffy skill. And also, I know people said that this works really well in something like cubes or dungeons, but gathering up mobs is almost impossible with this skill. So if I were to spawn a bunch of regular mobs, let me see how many I can spawn. Like a bunch of these mobs, let's say you're kiting them and you start using this skill. Like you see how there are stragglers behind you? Like there are stragglers that just get left behind, and it's really difficult to like move your character and still keep all of your all of the targets in front of you so that you can push them forward. So it's a little bit iffy. I wouldn't recommend this skill too much, but definitely give it a shot. And definitely in the future, once we have access to higher attack speeds, this skill will really shine in those areas. Next skill is I think it's like triplex punch or whatever. This one's actually really strong, and it's one of the stronger skills that we can use on our yellow skill tree. And if you spec for this right node in the middle tree, it goes from a 16-second cooldown to a 10-second cooldown with 30 green energy generation. So using this skill is not gonna stunt your green energy generation at all. In fact, it's gonna make it a lot easier to be able to fuel some of your higher cost green skills. So let's say if you take all of these, it moves you forward a couple times, and having the extra attack speed on this left node also makes it very easy to fit it into your rotation while you're attacking the boss, right? Now it does have a slight disadvantage of kind of missing the target if they're not moving. So if I spawn a regular dummy, these guys, oh no, not that one, this one, these guys don't move with you. So once you use a skill, it doesn't stop itself unless it's a large boss. So sometimes you'll find yourself missing this skill a bunch of times in dungeons. But for raids, I think this is one of the strongest skills you can use because it has such a such a good like it generates a lot of green energy for the cooldown, and it's just really solid for just general use. It also staggers enemies like this, so it's kind of useful for just regular Q runs as well. The next skill is pretty much PvP only. I would never use this in an actual PvE environment, so I won't be talking too much about it. Just give it a try. It's a pretty cool skill. It's really good for PvP, but in PvE environment it just doesn't fit in. So we're gonna move on to green skills. The first two green skills are kind of unique in that they are really low cooldown. So the first one is 6 seconds, second one is 8 seconds. Generally you would use one of these plus a combination of these longer cooldown skills, or you can use both of these and two of the other skills. So there's a very distinct difference between these first two green skills and the rest, mainly due to their cooldown and the amount of cycling you can do. Like you can cycle back all of the green energy back to yellow very quickly with these two skills. I am currently running a build that runs both of these skills, but I've ran a bunch of builds that don't run any of that don't run both, so only one. So it's up to you. Try out different builds. There are multiple builds that are available that will either use both or none, or both or just one. So definitely give it a shot and see if you guys see which one you guys like more, running both or just running one. I would not recommend a build that doesn't run any of these two, because then you're gonna have a really hard time cycling your green energy back to yellow. But who knows, maybe there will be a build that utilizes that kind of idea. So don't dismiss it as a possibility. That's kind of the main point I want to get across. A lot of these skill builds and skill choices that I mentioned are based on OBT, so don't dismiss any of the skills because they don't seem good right now. Whenever you run these skills, generally you want 10 points into them because they scale the most with points. For this first one, if you were to take 10 points, I'll take the right node, the middle node, and the left node. If you are using this as in combination with the second skill, if you're using this alone, I'll take the right node, left node for raids, or right node, left node for regular dungeons. For the second skill, I almost always take the right tree because it has a chance of stacking a bleed, which is as I mentioned before, is really strong. You always have to take the left one and the left one because the other options just aren't that useful. And it also makes a giant fist, so it looks really cool. So these two skills are very good, high damaging skills, high DPS, so they're really solid. You should have at least one of these in your build at all times. With smart decisions, so to say. Yeah. The next skill is Death Sentence. This one is probably the highest hitting skill, hardest hitting skill for Infighters. You generally take the right tree on the first tripod because it increases your attack speed. It does increase our cooldown by 2 seconds, but it's not that important considering if we miss the skill once due to getting hit by the boss, then it kind of throws out the whole reduce your cooldown by 4 seconds idea. Like it's just not like if you miss it once, then you might as well just take in this skill or this tripod because it allows you to hit the skill a lot more consistently. In the second tripod, you generally go for the middle, but if you are learning a fight, then you can go for the left tree because this will allow you to ignore flinches and displacements. And on the third tree, generally the best option is the left one because it increases your damage by about 10 to 12% if you were to take the right one. But if you're struggling with green energy generation and your energy maintenance, then I'll definitely give the right one a try because you only lose about 10% damage while maintaining 50% of your energy. So, well, you would normally use this around 80 energy to 100 energy for that max damage. Taking this right node will allow you to retain some of that energy so that not all of it goes away. The next one is this Green Fist. This is pretty much one of the most mandatory skills, I think. It's just really, really good. And I don't think anyone is going to say that this skill is bad. The only gripe is probably the initial hitbox is really small. So you really have to be up on the boss in order to hit it. What you want to use is the left node, middle node, left node. This left node on the third tripod is absolutely mandatory, and if you're leveling, I would not even consider using this skill until you can hit this third node because of how strong the instant use is. So if I didn't have this node, your skill, you would have to charge for about 2 seconds and then it will release, right? You can release it a little bit earlier, somewhere here, but why do that when you can just boom, that's it. You don't need to charge. So this is really good just for general use in dungeons and in raids. So I almost always take this skill. It does have a pretty hefty cost, 40 green energy, but if you build your yellow skills around the idea of using this skill as well as something like Death Sentence and some of these other 2 skills, then it's not too difficult to be able to support all of these skills. Alright, so the next, or the 5th green skill is the pretty much the iconic skill that Infighters had during like trailers and stuff. This is a skill that you guys might have seen pretty often. It's the ground pounds lava cage skill. It looks freaking awesome. It looks amazing, but reality is that it's only really good for dungeons and trash clearing because it fixes you in place for approximately 4 to 6 seconds. So unlike pushing forward, which kept you moving forward so you could reposition, this one locks you in place for 6 seconds, which means that it's going to be harder to fit this into a boss's rotation pattern without taking any damage or getting interrupted. So that's why I don't really recommend using this skill in most situations. But if you're doing dungeons, like, it's really solid for dungeons. So for dungeons, I would just take the middle, right, or middle, depending on what if you want to be immune to displacements or just want to do more damage, and the right and then the left tree. So it's not gonna have the lava cage, but it's just gonna be a more solid option for bosses as well, because it's gonna have a faster cast time. It also costs a lot at 40, and it has a cooldown of 30 seconds. So it's a little bit difficult for me to recommend this skill with when you have so many other skills that are available for at your disposal. The next skill is I think it's like Rising Dragon, or it's just Shuriken from Street Fighter. It's for this skill I'll take middle, left, and the last one is kind of up for debate. If you can consistently land the second part of the skill, and I'll show you what part I'm talking about. If you can land the second part of the skill, then you are more than welcome to take this right node, which will make it 100% crit chance, which is really good in the current state of the game. Or you would take the left node to increase the area of effect so that you can hit the skill a lot more consistently. So the Rising Dragon is 2 parts. You can interrupt either the first part, so instead of holding it down and getting that second part out, you can actually just press it once and that's it, right? So if you're trying to fit this into a rotation and the boss is attacking you, then you can just interrupt that second cast and just move away. So there's a lot of flexibility with this skill. It does really good damage, and it also knocks up enemies on the first cast, so it's really solid for dungeons as well. The next skill is also not too bad. It's a solid alternative to a Death Sentence. It has the same effect of consuming all of your green energy, but it allows you to take super armor without too much sacrifice to damage. Or you can increase the attack speed by 30% and increase the amount of yellow energy that you gain. So this is really good if you're struggling to maintain your yellow gauge while you're fighting. So the skill itself looks like this. It's a lot easier to use than Death Sentence because it has a shorter cast time. So I suggest giving this skill a try if you are not liking Death Sentence. And the last skill is Supernova. If you don't have this skill, you have to do the Awakening quest, but Supernova is not really that fantastic for rates, and I'll show you why. Even if I take the attack speed note, it just takes too long. It just takes too long, right? And Death Sentence is gonna do more damage anyways, and it's on a 30-second cooldown, so like Death Sentence is just a better option. It might seem like it's doing a lot of damage, but it's because these are trash mobs, or it doesn't have any defense. So I would just recommend Death Sentence over Supernova. But if you like Supernova, this is a whole lot better for trash mobs. So definitely, you know, if you like it, then just use it in place of Death Sentence. It's up to you. So like I said, it's really solid for trash mobs. Like it's one of the best trash clearing skills that Infighter has. So definitely nothing to dismiss. But in raid environments, it's a little bit difficult to justify this over something like Death Sentence, or even just the 7th skill. So that's pretty much been the overview of the skills. I might have missed some information, but having a good balance of yellow skills and green skills is a whole lot more important than which green skills do I use or which yellow skills do I use. So that's been the coverage or the discussion about individual Infighter skills. So if I were to give an example build of an Infighter, right? I made an image album a lot earlier when I first hit level 50 and played around with it in Guardian rates of an example build, and I think I ran it with 4 points here, 10 points here, and I would use this skill, this 3rd skill, this 4th skill right here, and I ran with this foot skill at 7 points. And I also ran this 5th skill at 10 points. Death Sentence at 10 points. The charge 5th skill at 10 points. And Rising Dragon at 10 points. Alright, so let me put that all in my skill bar. So this would be a loadout that I recommended early, and it's still very much usable. It does decent damage. There's nothing. It has really good balance between green skills and yellow skills. Like the amount of energy you generate with your green skills is very well balanced to the amount of energy that you spend with your green skills. So it's really it flows really well. So give it a try. But the main issue is that you're gonna have times where just a lot of downtime, right? And that might be good in the Guardian rates where you're gonna have some downtime, but it's hard to sync up the boss's rotations to your personal damage rotation to the point where you're gonna be off the boss when you don't have any cooldowns, and you're gonna be on the boss when you do have cooldowns. So it's a little bit harder to play around the boss with this build. Another build that I've been running more often is something like 10 points into this first string, our first skill. Taking this 3rd skill, put 4 points here just because I have points left over, and 10 points into this triple hit skill. 10 points into both 1st and 2nd skills. $10 points into the 5th skill because, like I mentioned, it's just really strong. And 7 points into my Death Sentence because I don't have the points. So you might say, why would you not take 10 points into this? Well, it's something that I've been testing, and it's definitely something that you should test out as well. But it's only about 20% DPS loss than 10 points. So I've been preferring the increased attack speed of my Q in this situation. But once like I mentioned, give it a try. test what you test it out yourself and see if you like it. That's more important than me sitting here telling you that this is better than the other skill. So in this build, I still have plenty of green energy generation to support all of my green skills, while having a lower cooldown rotation on all of my skills outside of something like my fist and my death sentence, which promotes more hit and run kind of gameplay. And that is that kind of gameplay is a lot safer to be able to avoid your guardian rates attacks while maintaining a decent amount of DPS uptime on the bosses. So just depending on the boss, you might be able to get away with a more greedy DPS build, but bosses like Legioros, the third and fourth ones, just require a lot of movement and a lot of repositioning, which won't allow you to get off some of the more animation heavy skills and cooldown dependent rotations. So once again, these are just example builds that I've been running, and these are definitely not 100% the best build that you can run. They're just examples of builds that you can create. And if you need any suggestions coming up with your own builds, or about certain skills in this exact situation, or how it fits into a build specifically, then feel free to leave a comment. But that's been the Infighter discussion. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys next time.